So I recently made a video where I read the first line of every book on my TBR bookshelf to try to get myself excited about my physical TBR again. And in that video, I was reminded of these 5 books, which I got from a bookseller in Toronto when I asked him what were his weirdest books. These are the ones he gave me. And I realized in that video where I was reading all the first lines that 4 out of 5 of these had incredible first lines that were very, very intriguing and made me want to immediately dive in. So I asked in that video if y'all would be interested in a reading vlog where I give these weird books a try and see if they really are as weird as that bookseller said. And y'all seemed pretty interested in the idea. So that is what I'm going to do today. I'm going to be reading these 5 books that are apparently supposed to be very weird, and we'll see how weird they really are. For a little bit of background, I personally love weird books. Not universally, of course. Sometimes a book doesn't work for me for other reasons, but I feel like I've never disliked a book specifically because it was weird. A book being weird has almost always been an absolute net positive for me. So I am very excited to dive into these, and I hope they are as weird as that bookseller made them out to be. Because that is 100% what I'm looking for. And most of these are quite short, so hopefully it won't take me ages to get through them. But let me start by introducing you to the 5 books. We have The Weak Spot by Lucy Elvin, Participation by Anna Mashavakis, If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga, Carnality by Lena Wolf, and last but not least, The Longcut by Emily Hall. If you want to see my reactions to reading the first lines of all of these, check out that other video. I'll have it linked in the description box so you kind of get the initial context for this. I hope you like weird books too, because we're diving headfirst into weird lit. We are all turning into weird lit girlies inclusive today, and I couldn't be happier. Now, I don't really know which one to start with because I'm pretty excited about all of them, to be honest. So I think I'm just going to start with The Weak Spot because it happened to be on top of the pile when I took them off the bookcase. So let's start with The Weak Spot by Lucy Elvin. I'm going to go get started on this. It's pretty short. It's 164 pages and the type is pretty big. So I feel like this is going to be a very quick read. But let's go see if it's weird. But before I go and start, I did want to thank this video's sponsor, Parade. Y'all know I'm a huge fan of Parade. They are my favorite place to get underwear, bras, bralettes, loungewear. Their pieces are so ridiculously comfortable. They are sustainably made, and they're constantly coming out with new fun collections, limited edition drops, really cute colors and patterns and textures. And they truly have some of the softest, most buttery fabrics I have ever felt for underwear and loungewear. It's sensory heaven, honestly. I'm obsessed with Parade's seamless universal fabric. It somehow manages to straddle the line between being incredibly soft and stretchy and comfortable while still being supportive enough to wear on a day-to-day basis. And I adore this red set. The Support Lift Plunge Bralette gives really comfortable support for day-to-day. And I love this vibrant, bright red color. It has a nice thick band at the bottom to offer a little more support. From working at my desk to going for a walk to doing a little bit of yoga, this bralette is absolutely perfect and so ridiculously comfortable to wear all day long. I also love the invisible high-rise thong. I am team high-rise underwear, always and forever, and a high-rise seamless thong is one of the most comfortable styles of underwear I could imagine, and I absolutely adore wearing these. Again, they are silky smooth, they are so stretchy, they're just a dream to wear. Parade is all about celebrating who you are. They want you to feel comfortable in your own skin and to be able to express yourself through your underwear and your loungewear. They also care so much about community, whether it's customer service or the fact that they have been donating a portion of their proceeds since the very beginning to a variety of really important causes. Make sure to use my discount code BRIDE40 to get 40% off the entire Parade website. Just click the link in my description box and use code BRIDE40 for 40% off. I know you're going to love Parade as much as I do, and thank you so much to Parade for sponsoring this weird books reading vlog. Okay, so I'm halfway through the week spot now, and I don't know that I have a huge amount to say other than the fact that I'm just really enjoying this. This is very much up my alley. It's very vague and nebulous and subtly sinister. And there's a lot of gaps and spaces to fill in with your own theories, and a lot of just small oddities and tension and creepy lore in this mountain town. And I really, really like it. It's really interesting, and I'm enjoying the process of reading it so far. I also feel like the main character is really interesting, and her transformation so far, the way she's evolving and some of the mannerisms she's picking up from the people around her. And yeah, I'm just really excited to see where this goes. I feel like this could either end in a very sort of mundane but open way where you can kind of read your own ideas into it, or it's going to just drop something ridiculous and very cut and dry and clear at the end that it's sort of been building up to in this really vague way. And honestly, I think I'll be happy with either of those options. I like this. I like the writing. It's a little sparse, but there are some really interesting metaphors, some beautiful little moments, but there's definitely a lot of space between all the sentences, both literally and figuratively, because of the way this is formatted. There is quite a bit of space between the lines, but it also just feels like there is a lot of emptiness, a lot of subtext left unsaid between every sentence, between every interaction, and I'm finding it very intriguing. So yeah, I'm having a really good time with it. I have a couple theories, so I'll do a very short spoiler section, although I feel like many of you probably won't have read this because I don't think it's a very well-known or popular book, but I'll do a spoiler section anyway. But I do feel like I might be able to finish this today because it's a super rainy, stormy, moody day out, and I had some other plans of things to do that I can't do in the rain, so I might end up just curling up in a chair somewhere, getting cozy, and reading the last 80-ish pages of this book. So I imagine I'll be back in a little bit to give my final thoughts. But first, let me share a couple spoilery things. So spoilers starting now. Like I said, I'm really enjoying kind of reading between the lines and trying to interpret what the author is saying. There have been a couple moments where it feels like the author is hinting at something a little more nefarious. We know that girls have been going missing and that the town blames it on this sort of mythical creature that's an amalgamation of different types of wild beasts. And they seem to believe that it's real, but they don't know what it is, and they think it's what's taking these girls. So there's that, which feels like it's probably not going to be a literal beast, but maybe, a metaphor for someone who is hurting the girls. And it seems like the book is hinting at Mr. Malone being that beast. He has this sort of unnatural, almost magical control over the people of the town. They seem to both fear him and revere him. There's this sort of level of charisma and authority that he has, and there's just constant, both subtle and not so subtle hints at his ability to control and manipulate the people around him, including a bit where the accountant sort of mimes being a marionette under Mr. Malone, the pharmacist, and our main character's boss's control. And we also just see him over and over again use his withholding of approval, I guess, as a manipulation tactic, as a way to control his employees and people in the town. He is very observant and very measured, and there are just moments where he has this, very clear mean streak, and he doesn't seem to mind hurting people to get what he wants. And we can kind of see the main character starting to pick up on some of those traits and herself becoming a little more mean, a little more callous. So I am wondering if he's going to be the beast or if he's involved in some way, because there's also this implication or hinting that what they do as pharmacists in this town, where they basically take confession from the people in the town, that there is some sort of magical transformation that takes place through listening and reacting and sort of giving advice to the people of the town. And the main character talks several times about how she feels like if she is able to emulate Mr. Malone's techniques, if she's able to master it, that she will be able to transform people and things. So I've kind of started to theorize that Mr. Malone is the monster and he's able to transform these young girls into something else, either literally or figuratively, and that is the cause of them going missing. I don't know, I just find it really interesting. And it's possible that I'm reading more into this than there is actually there, but it just feels like there's so much subtext, so much tension, and just something so deeply sinister about the things that are left unsaid, you know? So yeah, I'm interested to see how Mr. Malone kind of evolves, because it seems very clear that he somehow caused Helen to be sent to the hospital and then turned around and blamed it on our main character, despite the fact that she had stopped taking what the main character had prescribed weeks before this happened, and it doesn't seem like it was involved at all. And then just at the end, in the last 2 sentences of the first half, it's revealed that he is running for mayor. And we all know to be wary of politicians. So I'm really curious to see how that kind of plays out. I also feel like the main character is hiding something. She feels like a bit of an unreliable narrator, especially it seems like she has more of a connection to this town than she is revealing to the reader, which I find very interesting. So we'll see what happens. I am very, very intrigued. It really feels like there's something heavier and darker looming behind all of the sort of mundane day-to-day things that are happening in the novel so far. So I'm enjoying it. Those are some of my theories. Let me know in the comments if you have ever heard of or read this book. I'd be really curious to know, because I've never seen anyone else talk about it and it feels like it's just gone under the radar. But at least from the first half, I'm starting to feel like this might be a diamond in the rough. So I'm excited to finish this. I will go off and do that, and then I will be back to give you my final thoughts on The Weak Spot. So I just finished The Weak Spot, and wow. I would definitely classify this as weird lit. First of all, I feel like I need to confirm for each of these if I think the bookseller did a good job of recommending weird books to me. I would definitely classify this as weird. It's kind of in a category of its own. I guess it's literary fiction or experimental fiction, but it was really fantastic. I feel like there were a lot of things that I kind of picked up on early on, and I almost second-guessed myself about whether I was reading too much into the very subtle indications here and there. You know, if I was letting my mind run away with me, or if I was really picking up on something, and it turned out for a couple things that I was, in fact, picking up on something. And I just feel like this author did such a great job of laying the foundation for what was to come so slowly and subtly and nebulously and almost in a mundane way that kind of causes you as the reader to put your guard down and just read it at face value, or be willing to read it at face value and maybe not notice some of the creeping tension coming in. And there were definitely moments where I was just reading along and thinking like, okay, this is a description of a day at the pharmacy. This is a description of her, visiting the Abbey on the hill or going to the bar or whatever. But then there would be just one phrase here or one little description there or one awkward pause over there that caused me to just stop in my tracks and recontextualize what I've been reading and just get this feeling of increasing weight on my chest, of there being something not quite right. I don't know. I just thought this was really well done. It's really interesting, very open for interpretation. I think for people who don't enjoy books that have an open ending or are a little bit more vague, and kind of require you as the reader to put in a lot of effort to kind of help build the narrative and the themes, this isn't going to be for you. But if you at home agree with me that that's kind of half the fun of reading a book like this, is getting to have such a big, significant role in creating the story, then I think you'll like this. This was very unique. Very interesting. I feel like I'm going to be thinking about it for a while. And honestly, I'm not much of a rereader outside of books that I read a million times as a kid and are sort of comfort reads for me. Generally, I don't reread all that often, but I feel like this one is going to be a reread, especially because it's quite short. So it's not a huge undertaking, but there's something very readable and propulsive about it. And it's both very easy to read, but also quite a challenge for your literature interpretation muscles or something. I don't know how to put that, but this was quite a fun experience. And I think I'm going to give it 5 stars. Yeah, I feel pretty good about that. I really liked this. I feel like if I had to summarize what I think it's about, I think it's about the ways we lie to ourselves and lie to each other. It's about vulnerability and true active listening and real deep connection with other people, and the ways that we sidestep and avoid the kind of vulnerability you need to be open to have true connection with other human beings. It's about manipulation and control and misogyny and existing as a woman within a patriarchal system that expects women to be as agreeable and passive and easy to position like a doll as possible. It's about wolves in sheep's clothing, and even wolves in wolves' clothing that are allowed to continue to exist because it's too painful for communities to take a proper look within and recognize the beasts that are hiding in plain sight, even if there are people who are sacrificed to maintain that sense of comfort. It's about noticing the extraordinary in the mundane, and it's about self-discovery and turbulent coming of age. So that's a lot of things for it to be about. And again, I think to a certain extent, some of those things may not have been expressly intended by the author. Some of them, I'm sure, are things that I mostly read into the novel, but I think to a certain extent they are all there. And again, something I like about this kind of a book that is so nebulous and is so sparse is there are so many spaces to inject yourself into the narrative, not in a self-insert kind of way, but in a building the narrative collaboratively with the author kind of way, which y'all know if you've heard me talk about annotation. I love that. That's part of why I love annotating so much, because like I've said a million times, I feel like annotating feels like having a conversation with the author, really engaging with them about their work. And reading a book like this is that, just by its very nature, because you can't read a book like this without engaging in that conversation and filling in those gaps yourself. I mean, you could, but if you did, I think you would find this book very mundane and boring, probably, and you probably wouldn't enjoy it and would wonder what the point was and what it was even about, but then you'd be missing the point. So Yeah, I really like this. I'm trying to think if I'm going to do a spoiler section. Maybe I will. I'll do a short spoiler section, again, for the maybe 15 people who have read this, although maybe more of you will pick this up now that I'm making this video, which would make my heart happy because from the author's blurb, this is the author's debut novel, and it's really fantastic. So Lucy Elvin deserves more readers. So check it out if you're intrigued. But I'm going to do a short spoiler section and then I will pick what book I'm going to read next. So spoilers for the entirety of the weak spot. I was right. Mr. Malone was a beast. He was a predator. And I was also right. I don't remember if I said this in the first spoiler section because this might have happened just in the first portion of the second half after I did that update. But Annie, his assistant, left, and she left under sort of sudden and suspicious circumstances. And again, it was told in a very vague way, but I just picked up on some weird vibes and wondered if she had been sexually assaulted or at the very least sexually harassed by Mr. Malone. And that was why she left. And it was revealed that that was in fact the case. Again, I'm reading between the lines. There was nothing explicitly stated, but it seemed pretty clear what the author was implying, and also what the author was saying outright, which was that he was gaslighting her, telling her things, doing things, and then the next morning acting like it never happened, rewriting the conversation, trying to give her new memories, trying to manipulate her out of knowing what she knows happened. And he did it over and over and over and over again over the course of at least 6 months until she got to a point of just completely questioning her own understanding of the world, which is just textbook gaslighting. And that scene of her telling the protagonist her experience with Mr. Malone on that park bench in the city was so harrowing and probably the most direct and clear chapter of this entire book or scene of this entire book. And just the terror and the horror of being the victim of true gaslighting, where someone is using all of their charm and charisma and skill at manipulation and power over someone to legitimately try to cause them to feel insane and cause them to question their reality and their ability to understand what's happening around them and their memories. It is absolutely horrific. And it felt very vindicating in that I had such a bad feeling about Mr. Malone from the very beginning. And that is, of course, clearly telegraphed. Again, that's probably one of the things that's most obvious, is that there's something off with him, that he is mean and controlling and manipulative. But there are lots of people in the world who have those traits, who can be mean and manipulative and controlling, who are not necessarily full-on abusers, predators, gaslighters, going around sexually assaulting their employees. It was a lot. But I did feel that it was a very well-written scene, and it really had such a heaviness to it that really stood out in contrast to the rest of the novel that was very amorphous and floaty and vague and misty and hazy. And this scene was so grounded in reality. And I think that's really interesting because what she's talking about is being gaslit and how that must feel so, misty and hazy and nebulous and confusing and being lost at sea without an anchor. And so the author has sort of flipped that on its head by making that scene feel the most grounded and true and real and weighty and honest and straightforward. I really enjoyed that, and I don't know if that was kind of the driving force behind this book, was to talk about this kind of abuse, but regardless of whether it was or not, I found it really powerful and it made me really emotional and angry to read. And just overall, I found this book really fantastic. And I do think, I choose to read it and to interpret it as Mr. Malone and other men like him are this beast, especially the description of the beast as being an amalgamation of different animals. It's almost like this beast, this mythical creation of evil in the lore of this town, is an amalgamation of all of the men in this town who have been, are, and will be predators and predatory, and that young women are leaving the town because they are being preyed on. And then men like Mr. Malone get really angry that young people are leaving, especially young women, and that they're not respecting the tradition of this town, and they're not, staying to have babies and continue the legacy of this place that has such a toxic culture of protecting and turning the other cheek, turning a blind eye to abusers. Yeah, it was just, I just thought this was so well done. Like I said, I could kind of see some of it coming, but it was very powerful even when it arrived, even when the narrative went to those places that I was expecting it to go. It still had so much punch to it while still being told in a very sparse, succinct way. I've been told before that I shouldn't say I like purple prose because purple prose is supposed to be an insult. I disagree. I think purple prose can be a positive thing if you like it, and I do like it. I like excessively flowery and overly descriptive language if it's well done, and I think it can be well done. I don't think it's inherently a bad thing, even if a lot of people dislike it. But that's a bit of a sidetrack, but just to give context for the fact that I feel like the writing here is so beautiful, and is beautiful in a completely opposite way to purple prose, because it's beautiful in its subtlety, in its sparseness, in those empty spaces. It says even more between every word and between every line than it does with the actual words it uses, and each word that is used is so intentional. It was a pleasure to read. I had a great time, clearly. Anyway, I really liked this. Like I said, 5 stars. I was really impressed, and I think if any of this sounds interesting to you, or if you tend to like the books that I classify as weird lit, go pick this up, because not enough people have read this. I think it has less than 100 reviews on Goodreads, which is wild. So go read it. Okay, what am I going to read next? I think I'm just going to keep it simple and read the next book on the pile, which was The Longcut by Emily Hall. I'm really excited for a meditation on the place of art in the world and resistance to easy answers or easy definitions of art and other things. Sounds like what I love to wax poetic about all day, every day. So I'm excited. I'm going to go off and start this, and I'll be back when I'm halfway through to give you a mid-book update. That's it. Okay, bye. Well, I finally got to the halfway point of The Longcut, and this took so much longer to read than I expected, seeing as the first half is only 70 pages-ish, give or take. This book is dense, y'all. I'm gonna read a couple examples so you can really understand what I've been dealing with for the last couple days, but as much as I am finding this interesting, and I am, and I'm enjoying it in fits and starts, I don't know if I could say that I'm just generally enjoying it, but there are moments where I'm enjoying it. It's just so hard to read. The writing is incredibly circuitous and very long, complicated sentences that sort of circle back on themselves and jump around and then come back again and then go somewhere else and then come back and then restate something 4 times and then mention something from the beginning of the sentence, which was a page ago, and then finally get to the point, and it just happens over and over and over again. It's it takes a huge amount of brain power to actually follow what's happening, but I find the content interesting. I find the subject of the sentences, I find the themes very interesting. I like the fact that this seems to be entirely a book about defining what art is, or more accurately, defining the art of one specific artist. You know, asking questions about when something turns into art, when is something art, and when is it just an object in space? And does that have more to do with the intention of the artist or with the interpretation of the viewer? There's a lot of interesting stuff in here, and I'm enjoying it for those philosophical questions about the nature of art. But y'all, I don't have any spoilers because there is essentially no plot. But like I said, I will read you some excerpts so you can really understand my pain. Before I start reading excerpts, I just wanted to point out that I find it really funny. I feel like this is only going to be interesting to anyone who's read this, and I feel like not that many people have read it, but still, I'll say it anyway, because it occurred to me that it's not so much the writing that's making this hard for me to read. While the writing is definitely a sticking point, it makes it more challenging. I enjoy reading books that are challenging to read. I find them interesting, and I'm enjoying the sort of experimental nature of it and how unique the prose is. But the hardest thing for me is just the context in which I'm reading it, because I'm reading it for a reading vlog and I have a deadline and I'm trying to read it quickly so I can finish several more books for this video. Because of that pressure and the fact that I'm trying to read it in a short period of time, it's making it much more difficult for me to focus and to absorb. This is the kind of book that, you know, left to my own devices, I would prefer to read a page at a time or a couple pages at a time, and then maybe take a couple days off and then come back and read a paragraph and then take a day off. It's that kind of book for me personally, but I can't read it that way. So it's making it even more challenging. And I just find that kind of funny because so much of the first half of this book is about our unnamed protagonist talking about things existing in different contexts and how the context can change the thing so fundamentally as to make it almost a completely different thing or for it to lose all meaning. And I just find that really funny that so much of this is about context and shifting contexts and the impact that has as I struggle to read this because of the external context. Anyway, what am I even saying? I don't know. This book is doing something to my brain. Okay, I'm going to read a quote for you. This is the quote that I read to my husband to demonstrate how much I was struggling with reading this quickly, and I really wish I'd recorded his reaction because he looked absolutely flabbergasted. It was very funny. But here we go. Thus was the new desk unit a spatiotemporal unknown. Its zone of spatiotemporal unknowability being perhaps a factor in my idea of putting the egg on a ledge in order to observe it. An object from an uncategorized zone dwelling in a zone of spatiotemporal unknowability. Yeah. Yep. Let me find another example for you. I'm trying to find ones that aren't too long because, like I said, most of these sentences are extensive and I don't want to be reading for ages, but let me try to find another one that kind of gives you an example. Okay, here's another one. The question of what my work was, thus constantly haunting or dogging me, art being as it was, something that could be made from anything at all, and could be about or relating to anything at all. How, therefore, I could not stop asking myself, did you, I, pluck from the stream of life or ideas the contents of my work, or the materials with which to do it? I was pulled, however, hither and yon by the stream of life or ideas, unable to pluck, unable to sort or sift one thing from another. Thus the question of what my work was remained an open question, nothing in the other parts of my life having provided a model for or example of how I might close it. The smoking breaks closing the questions I could not answer at my job being not quite the thing. That's what the whole book is like, okay? It's all like that. So this is taking longer to read than I expected because I often read a page and then realize that I at some point lost the plot and I have to go back. But again, I'm enjoying it. I think the ideas are interesting. And I do find the writing style interesting and kind of entertaining. And there are quite a few little pockets of humor that are very much built on the kind of ridiculous writing style. But it's just really hard to read quickly. So that's what's going on with this. I'm enjoying it. Yep. But it's a lot. It's funny, it's insightful, it's exploring interesting ideas that I enjoy. The writing is really cool and unique, but it's hard to read and very dense. So that's where I'm at with the Longcut. I have decided, I actually just started the next book for this vlog because I realized I needed to let myself read this a touch more slowly, otherwise I was going to lose my mind. So I'm still working on this. I'm still going to finish it for this video, but I'm just going to let myself read it a touch more slowly so that I can continue to have a functioning brain. So in the meantime, I've started the next book for this video, which is Participation by Anna Machavakis. I'm not very far into it, only 2 to 3 chapters in, and the chapters are pretty short, so page 21. But so far this is much easier to read. The sentences themselves are easier to read, but it also has definitely more of an experimental style, which again makes sense for this whole reading vlog, since these are just books that one random bookseller classified as weird, and there are lots of different ways that a book can be weird, and one of the ways is that they have an experimental structure or writing style, and these both certainly do, but in different ways, and this one is easier to read at a quicker pace. So we'll see where that takes us. But that's the Longcut, the first half. What a book. It truly does feel like my brain is melting while I'm reading it, but it's kind of fun. So off I go to finish this book and also to work towards the midpoint here. I'll be back soon with an update, and we'll continue to immerse ourselves in these very strange books. Okay, so I just got to the halfway point of Participation by Anna Mashavakis, and I know that I said that this one was a little bit easier to read, a little less dense than the Longcut, but I think I was wrong. It's different, its writing style is different, and the individual sentences are easier to read, yes, but it's still a bit of a struggle, y'all. I feel like my brain is melting even more now because I'm alternating between reading this and reading the Longcut, and I've had a very intense, exciting, and very positive in a lot of ways, but also just kind of exhausting month, and I feel like I'm pretty sleep deprived right now. There's so much happening, and my brain is not functioning, and I'm struggling a lot. That being said, this is definitely very interesting. I'm less sure what this is about than I am with the Longcut. I feel like the Longcut is very clear with what it's about, even though the way it expresses it is kind of impenetrable. But this book, I feel like it's a little easier, a little more accessible, I guess, to the reader. But I'm still not 100% sure what the thesis statement is here. What exactly is the author exploring? It appears to be something to do with love and relationships, and I suppose exploring less traditional relationships or different ways that relationships can be formed and can be expressed. And there's some stuff in here about attachment theory, which kind of fits into that idea of exploring sex and love and relationships. But there's also some stuff in here about lack of consideration or lack of inclusion in literature and the alienation you feel as a reader when you come across moments in a book that make it very clear that the author was not writing this book with you in mind. I have experienced as a woman, certainly, feeling alienated by the books I've read because of a just complete lack of any acknowledgement that women exist and might have a different lived experience than men, or just, books that are written in a very male-gazy way or from a very male perspective that can feel alienating. And I very much relate to those sections. And there was one section in particular that really expressed it so well. But I learned long ago how, in the absence of explicit reminders of my ineligibility, to contort myself to gain entry where I wanted when I could. And then a little bit later, in the best cases, when you read something, you feel like you've known it forever. In the best cases, you feel like it read you first, which I love. And then a little later even, I understood the fact that this small sword of exclusion, I felt it, and yet I wanted still to love. And just that idea of reading something that feels exclusionary to you, but still feeling this deep need to connect to it and working so hard to connect to it and to relate to it, despite sort of having those 1,000 small cuts of being reminded over and over again that this is not for you or was not written again with you in mind, which is just, a reminder of how important I think inclusion is, and diversity and representation in literature and in all art, honestly. And it kind of goes on to talk about how this can kind of cause you to feel a little numb and disconnected, not only from what you're reading, but sort of in your life in general. I just really liked that, and I wrote quite a bit at the end of that chapter because I had a lot of thoughts after reading that section. And then there was also another section that I really loved that called out all of us annotators in the best possible way, which I loved. Hang on, let me find it. I could list the ambient and direct forces acting on each of us in this story, these stories. I could track their crescendos as they leave record after record in the dust. Or I could let you list them yourself in the margins of this or one of the books on your own stack. And then in the next paragraph, it's also out of a stubborn belief in the power of marginalia. It must be the case that under certain conditions, the margins can rewrite the text. And I just love that so much because I'm constantly adding my own marginalia into the books I read, writing in the margins all of the time, adding my own thoughts. And I do think that it's true that under certain contexts, in certain conditions, adding your own annotations can rewrite the text because your understanding of the text is shifting. And just, you know, what a book is, if we get into the Longcut and this idea of defining what art is and sort of where those categories begin and end, you know, what makes a book and what contributes to the story. Is it just the printed text, or when you start to add your own marginalia, when you write in the margins, when you add your own annotations, are you permanently changing what this one specific book existing in this time and place means, how it's read, its context, its purpose, its effect on people, both on you and on anyone who might read the book, the original text, and your annotations later. I just love that. I'm such a nerd for annotations, so I love that there was a call out for that because I love it. That's a big reason why I love to annotate, is I do feel like it sort of create something new out of what the author created and what you're contributing as a reader. I'm not going to keep going on about this. I have videos talking about annotating and you can hear me nerd out more about it, but I just loved that call out. I am struggling a little bit with this. I'm not going to lie. Not only, like I said, is it a little bit more dense than I initially understood, and I am struggling a little bit to kind of parse the meaning at times. I am only halfway through, so maybe the second half is really going to tie everything together. I am also finding some of the, included sexual fantasies a touch jarring, and I imagine that they will tie in again somehow thematically, but I guess I'm not used to reading such a cerebral work that almost feels like essays loosely put to plot, but not really, because there really isn't any plot, but essays sort of framed by fiction having essentially sex scenes or kink scenes feels strange to me. But again, maybe I just have not had enough exposure to whatever genre this is, and this is a common thing. Or maybe, again, this is just part of this being a bit of a weird book that defies categorization and does its own thing. I'm just feeling a little bit like I'm not quite connecting and I'm not quite on the same page with the author. I want to be, I am trying to be, but I am not quite receiving the message. Yeah, that's where I'm at. I feel like that's not the most ringing endorsement ever. It is very interesting. It does say on the back that it's a love story like no other. It certainly is not like any other love story I've personally read. I'm not exactly sure who this is a love story between at this point, but obviously, I'm going to keep reading it. We'll see. We'll see what happens in the second half. It is going faster than the Longcut. The Longcut is going slowly. I'm going to stop talking. I've been talking for so long, and I'm not even sure I've said very much, which again, kind of feels like both of these books. Again, not in a bad way. I'm not trying to insult them. They just, that is, they use a lot of words to say very little. And the very little is interesting. Don't get me wrong. It's just a lot of words. Okay, I'm going to go and finish these. I can do it. I'm having fun. See you soon. Oh, God. So I just finished participation, and do I have thoughts? I mean, yes, because I always have thoughts. I can never not have thoughts, but this kind of underwhelmed me. I'm not gonna lie. I think it's interesting. And I'll say right off the bat, I think I'm sitting around a 3-star rating, which is not bad for me at all. What I liked about this was the experimental form, the switching up of the form from chapter to chapter, the sort of non-traditional narration style, the barest thread of a plot, tying together essays and many thought experiments on interesting topics, mostly focused on relationships, connection, love, belonging, attachment, etc. What didn't work for me was the inclusion of a sort of post-apocalyptic element, which was a little too vague to really add anything for me personally. I do love reading post-apocalyptic fiction, and it just felt like that was added in here unnecessarily. It just felt like an extra layer that was not explored enough or incorporated enough for it to be worth the effort, especially because it's so extreme of an idea and so presumably would have such a huge impact on these people's lives, and yet it didn't. So for me, that was kind of a miss. I would have been interested in seeing more of that element, but it felt very inconsequential, which is kind of strange. I also didn't feel like there was much emotion here, or maybe I just couldn't muster up much emotion for it. But keep in mind, if you are not familiar with me, then you might not know, I'm a very emotional person. I muster up emotion at the drop of a hat very easily. I feel many feelings and I feel them strongly. So for a book to elicit literally zero emotion for me is very rare. You know, I can't say that I even really was able to muster up frustration or boredom or irritation or any of those kinds of feelings that I often do towards books that don't quite connect for me. I just felt a little numb while reading this. I think if the book had continued to be narrated by E and we'd been able to watch her relationship with S develop from more of a direct, intimate perspective, maybe I would have been able to feel something about their burgeoning relationship. But because as soon as they connected, or shortly before, the narration shifts and we're no longer in E's head and seeing this story from her perspective, I just felt like that completely pulled me out of the book, and I wasn't that far in already. I'm not sure I understand the purpose of that decision, and I'm not sure that I like it. For me personally, I didn't feel it added anything. And for me anyway, I felt it took away from the urgency or the emotion of the novel. And not that every novel has to be incredibly emotional or be about the emotional core, but because so much of this was about relationships and love and connection and intimacy and belonging and attachment, it just feels odd for it to be so detached and to feel so clinical. Yeah, I don't know. I feel mixed feelings, and I don't know that I feel disappointed necessarily. I mean, obviously it would have been nice if I loved this book and really connected to it. There were moments that I did connect to. There were things I liked about it, and I think I mentioned those in the first half update, like the comment about marginalia. I liked those passages. There were a couple things that really captured my attention, or that I quite liked, or I found very interesting, but most of those were concentrated in the first half. I annotated significantly less in the second half. I felt much more disconnected in the second half. For me personally, it felt like it was just getting a little caught up in its own experimental nature and trying to be unique and different and metaphorical and abstract to the point of becoming a little incomprehensible. I would be curious to read more from this author. This definitely piqued my interest. I just don't think this book particularly was really my cup of tea. I just feel there was something missing here, and I am typically a more character-driven, sort of emotionally based reader. That is usually my window or door into a narrative, and then I'm able to appreciate everything else because I have that emotional connection or that connection to the characters. I can then sort of wade through the intellectual or thematic waters of the book I'm reading. This one felt very cerebral, which is fine, but it didn't feel like it had the heart to back it up. And for me, that is something that I value. So I think I'm going to leave it there. I'm not going to share spoilers because, again, while there was more plot in the second half, I just really don't have that much to say about the plot or the spoilers. Very interesting though, if this sounds interesting to you, if you're intrigued by the things I said about it, if you are more of a cerebral experimental form over emotion sort of reader, maybe this will be your cup of tea. It does seem like it really worked for some people. And I don't think it's a waste of time by any means, even if it isn't 100% your kind of book. I think it is a very interesting challenge as a reader to tackle something like this and to try to parse what is happening. I'm still reading the Longcut, to the surprise of no one. It's so dense. I know I've said that a million times, but it truly is. So I'm going to start the next book for this video, and I'm just going to keep slowly working on the Longcut in the background. It might be the final book I finish for this video, who knows? But I am going to start the next book on the pile, which is If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English, which I have heard really good things about around the internet. Several people I follow have read this in the year and a half since I purchased it. When I purchased it, I actually hadn't heard of this book at all, but now I've seen quite a few people read it and rave and love it. So hopefully this one will be a little bit more up my alley. So I'm going to go off and get started on this, and I will be back with an update when I get to halfway. So I got a little caught up and stayed up until 2 a.m., which it is right now, reading If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English. And it's really interesting. This is very different from the other books I have read or am reading for this video so far. It definitely still has its own unique experimental style, I would say, but it definitely has more of a traditional narrative. I guess The Weak Spot also had a traditional narrative, but this is less vague. It's more upfront with not only what's happening within the narrative, but also the themes and what it's exploring. And the first half, it does seem like the second part sort of switches things up, which halfway through was basically right at the end of the first part. So I haven't actually gone into the second part, which does look like it's structurally different. And I don't know how that is going to shift things, but the whole first part is alternating between the girl and the boy's perspectives. And each section, each perspective starts with a question. And I'm definitely, I don't think enjoying it is the right word, especially because their dynamic is pretty toxic. They definitely have an abusive dynamic going on. So enjoy is the wrong word, but I am finding it interesting. I'm engaged. I am invested in knowing what's going to happen with these characters. I'm curious to see where the author is going with some of the foundations that are being built thematically here. So far, so good. Also, this is probably, other than The Weak Spot, this is probably the easiest or fastest read of the books for this video, which is kind of a relief after participation and the Longcut, which I have not picked up since I started this because this is just so much easier to quickly read at a normal pace. So yeah, good so far. I don't think I have anything spoilery to share. I will say this one has the most content warnings of everything I've read so far, and also just has quite a bit of gross content that is a little unsettling. Some of it's pretty unsettling. And I'm finding it interesting to read about sort of both of their experiences of living in the city and the Americans' experience of moving to Egypt, feeling in America so Egyptian and sort of being defined by that part of her identity, and then moving to Egypt and feeling so very other. And that kind of experience of being in the liminal space between, I guess, is very interesting. And there's definitely a huge gap in the girl and the boy's level of privilege and their resources. It seems like this book is pretty heavily focused on the exploration of classism, which is interesting as well. So I'm just kind of along for the ride right now. I don't know 100% where this is going, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with going wherever Norinaga wants to take me, and hopefully it'll keep being as interesting as the first part was. I was going to say I'm having a good time. Again, a good time, maybe not accurate. I am engaged and immersed, and I stayed up till 2 a.m. to keep reading because I wanted to know what would happen next. So that's where we're at. And I am now going to go to sleep because I'm tired. And I will probably finish this tomorrow because I am reading this at a pretty quick pace. So I will be back tomorrow when I finish this and I will share all my thoughts. Okay, bye. Good night. Innocence died screaming, honey, ask me, I should know. I slithered here from Eden just to sit outside your door. Okay, so it's the next day, and I have finished If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English, and this really ended with a bang for me personally. Obviously, like I mentioned in the halfway update, I was finding it really fascinating in the first part, but I did feel like I was kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. It felt like something was going to come to kind of flip things around, and that definitely happened in the final part, which just completely recontextualized everything that came before it in a really wonderful way. I found it really fascinating and really kind of exciting and interesting the way that that shifted my understanding of everything that came before it. So I don't want to get too much into details because I don't want to spoil it for anyone who might want to read it. I would definitely recommend this to people who are interested in explorations of power, power sort of in general, but also more narrowly power dynamics in relationships and classism and how privilege and class and resources can impact those power dynamics within a relationship. But there's also a larger conversation about stereotypes and prejudice and expectations and how our expectations, our prejudice, our stereotypes about certain groups of people can really shift our experience of the world and of art. And I don't want to say too much. I don't want to give anything away. I just thought this was really great. I really enjoyed it. I liked all of the little philosophical questions. I especially loved the one that tied back in with the title, which was, if an Egyptian cannot speak English, who is telling his story? And I feel like that's a really good indicator of what this book is about and what the author is getting at. So I think I'm going to leave it at that for my non-spoiler review because I really don't want to inadvertently say something that gives away that final shift that really changes everything. If you're going to read this, I would highly recommend it. If you are going to read it, I would recommend reading all the way to the end. If you DNF before you get to the third part, you are missing 99% of the story, if not just 100% of the story, because the whole first part means something completely different once you have the context of the final part and that sort of commentary. So I'll just put that out there. But yes, I really enjoyed this. I think I've been debating with myself since I finished it a couple hours ago, whether it's a 4 or a 5-star read. I'm leaning towards 5 stars. I do feel slightly on the fence, but I think for now I'm going to say 5 stars. I might change my mind in the future. I always reserve the right to change my mind. There's just so much that this has to offer in terms of commentary and the form. I just thought it was really innovative and I really enjoyed it. So that is my non-spoiler review. Now I'm going to get into some spoilers for anyone who's read this, so I can really talk about that third act switcheroo. So I absolutely loved that the third part of this was basically a writer's workshop where a bunch of classmates, presumably American, mostly white, upper class classmates, are analyzing and critiquing Noor's manuscript, as in the first 2 parts of this book, and really coming out with some of the funniest, most... As someone who went to theater school, obviously it's different than, studying creative writing, but there is kind of a similarity in the over-analysis and pretension and, leaning towards being sort of obtusely woke, if that makes sense. I'm not using, woke as a derogatory thing. I just mean woke in the common terminology of, being aware of different people's experiences and trying to be more inclusive, or caring about diversity, or caring about women's rights and gay rights and trans rights, and on and on and on. Wrapping that up within the package of being woke or leftist or whatever. But this idea of getting so caught up in the terminology and in the wokeness of it all, for lack of a better term, that you kind of miss the point, that you're so hyper-focused on all of these sort of little individual pieces of the puzzle that you miss the forest for the trees, if that makes sense. So they're having this really navel-gazing sort of discussion, and they're really picking apart her work and critiquing it, putting a lot of things onto it that I'm not sure totally exist, and then missing the things that are actually there, some of the deeper meanings. And I think the best part, obviously it sucks, but the part that I found the funniest and the most relatable and the most interesting was the fact that in that whole section, other than Noor reading an excerpt of her work, she is not allowed to speak. Everyone else talks about her work and sort of talks over her and talks for her about her experiences, and she just sits there and is sort of talked at. And at the moment that she's supposed to be able to take the floor, the instructor takes over and talks again for her, and we never get to hear the final word from her herself. And I just feel like that whole final part really feels like a commentary on readers, on Western leftist readers who get so caught up in all the minutiae, and again, miss the forest for the trees. And I can admit that I also do this. I would consider myself woke, not derogatory. I would consider myself significantly leftist and progressive, and I also care about inclusion and diversity and representation, and I share trigger content warnings for every book I recommend, and, I care about these things. They are part of my worldview and things that I value. And I also know of myself and about myself that I do have a tendency sometimes to overanalyze things and sort of navel gaze to the point where I miss the larger point. I think... y'all can let me know. Maybe I'm not as self-aware as I think I am, but I think I'm able to often sort of take a step back from that at some point and look at the larger picture and kind of get that top-down overview sort of feeling, as well as all the little micro analysis. But I definitely can get into that space. And there's something very granular about academia in general, but I think when you're in academia for the arts, you have this butting of heads between this granular sort of more scientific or formulaic perspective or view of the world, framework for the world and the work. And then you have, a creative artistic mind and the messiness that is real life, the messiness that is real people and real events. And, how do you tell a story truthfully without being criticized for just creating stereotypes of characters or caricatures if the characters you're telling a story about or the real people you're telling a story about actually have all those traits. You know, stereotypes exist in part for a reason, and there are people who fall very neatly into stereotypes. And I think that's something that the author was also looking into, that there's this criticism of characters being too stereotypical, too much of a caricature, and, you know, possibly sometimes being a harmful portrayal or bad representation. And I have certainly called out all those things in books I've read before as well. And I do think there's value in noticing those things, but it is a good question. Real people are messy. Real people can be stereotypical. There are many things about me that are very stereotypical, whether it's, you know, things to do with me being Canadian or a white woman or in my early 30s or being a childless cat mom or a millennial, whatever it is. And you can sort of lean too hard on stereotypes and use that as a means to not create a true, complex, three-dimensional, nuanced character. But also sometimes people are stereotypical or they have those kinds of traits, and those people still exist and their stories still deserve to be told and can still give us something and be interesting. So anyway, that was a bit of a sidetrack there, but it really does feel like a critique of readers and a critique of people who are unwilling to meet a story where it's at, constantly giving constructive criticism, but is it constructive criticism if no one asked for it? If it's uninvited and unwanted? But then on the other side, you know, as a reader and as someone who reviews books as part of my job, I think overanalyzing books is fun. I enjoy that. I think it's interesting. I'm doing it right now. And that's one of the things I love about reading, is getting to flex that analysis muscle. And I think asking those questions and getting involved and really diving into it is, you know, in some part something that I feel personally, I'm not saying other people do, but I personally feel like it's something I owe to an author, to really show my respect for their effort by really engaging with it and having that conversation. But again, at what point are you taking it to an extreme, to the point that you can't even really follow the story, understand the message, be present in the story that's being told, if that makes sense. So I really liked that final piece, and I really liked how it recontextualized everything before it. Just this idea of, are stereotypes still stereotypes if they're true? And is telling a true story, or even a fictional story, but a story that, you know, explores certain facets of reality, is it unacceptable if it's not in line with progressive liberal standards of female empowerment and of inclusivity? I think I can apply this critique to myself too, because I do think back on some books I've read recently that I was unhappy with the representation of bisexual characters, for example. Like I think about You Exist Too Much, and I really didn't like that main character was represented the way they were, because it really leaned on so many negative stereotypes about bisexual people. I also just didn't enjoy that book in general, but that aspect of it, yes, on the one hand, I do think it's perpetuating negative stereotypes about bisexual people that are rampant, and I don't enjoy that. But on the other hand, there are real people like that who are bisexual and do those things. And those people still exist, and stories can still be written about them. They don't need to be wiped from the face of fiction and only have representations of bisexual people that don't include any of those stereotypes or misconceptions, because there are real people like that. But the problem becomes when you shift it from being there is one person who is like this to all people who share X identity are these things, right? So I think that's an important distinction. And again, I can apply that critique to myself, and I certainly struggle with finding that line. And I think it's a hard line to find, but I did just really enjoy the way that the author shone a light on that idea. But yeah, and I just love how it all comes back to the title of, if an Egyptian cannot speak English, who is telling his story, and who gets to tell these stories? What are the power dynamics there about who gets a publishing deal, whose voice is heard, whose voice is prioritized, how their own perceptions and prejudices can color the story they tell. And then on the other side, how a reader's prejudices and experiences and expectations color how they receive it, and who is telling the story. What is the truth in the story? Can it be true? if it's being told by a third party, and what are all those, power dynamics, including classism and privilege, that are tied up with that. And I just really liked it. It's a really thought-provoking book. It's really interesting. Obviously, I have a lot of thoughts whirling in my head because I just finished it a couple hours ago. I feel like I will keep thinking about this book, and in, a week's time or a month's time, my thoughts will have sort of coalesced into something more tangible and concrete and succinct, maybe, but knowing me, probably not. But I don't have time for that because I have a deadline. So these are my I finished this 2 hours ago, thoughts. I hope you enjoyed them. And like I said, I'm giving If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English 5 stars. I thought this was very interesting. And I don't know if I would say it's a weird book necessarily, but it definitely has a very unique experimental structure and form to it. And maybe that makes it weird as in unusual. But I feel like out of the books I've read so far, this one feels the least weird to me, though it certainly does something exciting and new and interesting. But I feel like it could still fit under that category again, because what do you define as weird? It does have sort of its own thing going on. It is unique in that way. So maybe it counts. But this one's sort of borderline for me. I don't know if I would personally classify it as weird so much as unique. But anyway, that's If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English. I'm still reading the Longcut. Don't ask me how it's going. I don't want to talk about it. But I have started the final book for this video, which is Carnality by Lena Wolf, and I'm only on page 10, so I don't have any initial thoughts, but it does feel like it's going to be much more traditional in terms of having characters and a plot that kind of follow a regular novel's structure, at least at the start. Who knows? Things could disintegrate quickly, but right now it feels more like a traditional standard novel. So we'll see where the weirdness comes in, but that definitely makes it a little bit easier for my purposes for reading it because it feels a lot more familiar in that way. So I'm going to go keep reading this, and I'll be back when I get to the halfway point to let you know my thoughts and if it's still feeling pretty normal as far as a novel goes, or if the weirdness has started to creep in. So I'm halfway through Carnality, and trust me when I say, what the fuck? I have no idea what's going on. This is definitely a weird book, but in a completely different way than all the other books that I've read for this video are weird. This is not weird in that it's too cerebral or that its form is really experimental. This is just weird in that I have no idea where this plot is going and why. There's a nun who is hunting someone down to take their organs because they went on a TV show to try to reconcile with their wife, and a random Swedish dude who started a chase with the police and stole a boat and basically kidnapped 2 other people and then tried to force them to swim in the lagoon. Listen, I have no idea what's going on. I have no idea how to feel about what's going on. I'm very much just along for the ride. I have no idea what this book is trying to tell me, or if it's trying to tell me anything at all. I have been barely annotating this one just because I have no thoughts. I'm just this facial expression trying to process what's happening. 4D chess does not compute. I'm not enjoying the process of reading it. It's very much absurd and sort of harebrained adventure, I guess. But I have no idea what's going on. So this is going to be probably the shortest update for all these books so far because I just don't know what to say because I don't know what's happening. Yeah, that's it. That's the update. I am confusion. That's me. That's halfway through Carnality. We'll see what the second half has to bring. It looks like we're shifting perspective to the organ hunting nun. So that'll be fun. Who knows what will happen next? Will pigs fly? Will dogs sing sonatas? I would not be surprised. So I'm gonna go read this. So I just finished Carnality, and it continued to be a little hard to define, a little strange. I find it really hard to express my feelings about this one because it's not that I disliked it per se. I just wanted more from it. You know, there was something missing there for me. And yes, this is weird. It has a very strange plot, but there wasn't enough for me personally in either the themes or the characters to really make me care. I think that was the biggest problem for me, is as much as I was sort of oddly fascinated by how strange the plot was, I wasn't invested. I wasn't worried about the characters or wondering really what would happen to them. I felt like a very passive observer. And the themes, while they existed, you know, themes of how we define good and evil, if you do evil in pursuit of good, is it still doing evil? You know, where do you draw that line? You know, themes of revenge or retribution or punishment or recompense, paying for your crimes. At what point have you atoned for your misdeeds? And sort of this internal urge that humans have for violence. And this book sort of teeters on that edge of what happens when you give in to those sort of intrusive thoughts of violence or destruction, I guess. Appeal to the baser carnal instincts of humanity. And all those themes are interesting. I just don't think this went as deep into the themes as I would have personally wanted. It felt a little surface level for me, a little just passing over, throwing out themes without truly exploring them. And I still don't really feel like I have an inkling of what the author's perspective on these things are. Not that an author has to inject their own opinion or perspective into the books they're writing, but I find it interesting to read and feel like I can sort of see the author's perspective and what the author is kind of arguing for through their work. And this felt a lot more removed, both on the author's part and then also on my part, because I really didn't feel like the book drew me in. And the characters, as well, as weird as they are very sketched out. They're more an outline than a filled in character. And as a character-driven reader, lacking that definitely impacted my reading of this. So I didn't hate it. I didn't really dislike it. It was a very quick read. I was interested in it the whole time. I just didn't feel truly properly engaged or pulled in or invested in a way that I feel I would want to with a book like this. I don't want to say too much without spoiler tags because I don't want to give anything away, but I will do a little spoiler section because I had a thought when I finished this about how this could have been more engaging for me personally. So I'm going to put that out there as my workshop for this book in the spoiler section. And otherwise, I'm just going to say this was fine. I feel pretty neutral about it. I'm going to land on 3 stars, I think. I think it did some things well and some things in an interesting way, but didn't go quite as far as I think it could have. and didn't really blow me away or anything. So, okay, spoilers for Carnality. Basically, the whole first part of this book is the Swedish writer arriving in Madrid, meeting this random man at a bar who is on the run from a nun, and he asks to stay with her. She agrees, and he tells her the story of why he is on the run from a nun who's trying to harvest his organs. And turns out he went on this reality TV show called Carnality, which this nun runs or is, stars on, where essentially they're trying to help people who have gone astray. They're, sort of alternating between providing absolution and assistance and support and doling out humiliation and punishment. So we get his whole story. Turns out they want to harvest his organs for a whole host of people, but primarily for his heart, for his soon-to-be ex-wife who he cheated on, to make up for all the infidelity. And then they go on vacation together. They meet another Swedish person. They end up on the run from the cops because he dared her to walk down a beach naked where it was illegal to be naked. And she gets arrested, but then they drive off, they steal a boat, and then the Swedish man wants them to go swimming, and they start getting sinister vibes from him, and he seems like he's going to attack them, so she hits him over the head, and he dies, and then they are too scared to get back in the boat, or specifically the Spanish man is too scared to get back in the boat, so then they're stranded on a little island for several days, and when they're finally picked up, they're sent to jail. Or at least the woman is sent to jail because they're not sure exactly what happened and how this man died. And also she was going to be arrested anyway for indecent exposure. So then while she's in prison, the organ harvesting nun starts writing her letters and tells her basically her whole life story of how she became a nun and how she lost her thumb and her abusive stepfather. And then eventually the nun helps get the original Swedish writer out of jail and invites her to come visit her. But by the time she goes to visit her, the nun who is in her 90s has sort of stopped responding and has just written a letter to her, basically bequeathing the Carnality show to this woman who she has never met to take over. And then at the very end, the Swedish woman, because I forgot to mention, at one point she volunteers to take care of a random woman's husband who has Alzheimer's and is in a wheelchair for free just because she wants to be a better person. And at the end, she goes to join them on their vacation and swims out with him while the family goes off to have a meal or something. And he asks her to help him end his life, and she does. And that's the end of the book. That could have been really quite the ride. And I mean, it was, but it could have had more of a thriller vibe to it or a horror bent. There were definitely moments that felt like a thriller or felt like we were getting into horror territory, but it didn't quite go there. And I think for me personally, with this subject matter, with this plot, with these characters, going full on absurd horror would have been the direction I personally would have gone. And I think that would have been more engaging, and it would have felt more immediate and had more stakes, would have helped us to feel more worried for the characters, more attached to the characters, especially we felt more immersed in it. So even if the story had been framed less from the perspective of the writer, although I imagine that is something to do with the author being a Swedish writer, that the main character is also a Swedish writer. But I think if we had been viewing the story from the eyes of, say, the Spanish man who went on Carnality and was the victim of organ harvesting by a nun, we could have been right there in his shoes, under the stage lights, feeling the pressure, feeling the humiliation, and then the fear, and then the uncertainty, and being on the run, and sort of processing the absurdity of the situation he's in, and sort of vacillating between thinking for sure it must be a joke, because how could this be his life, to realizing that he is actually in mortal danger. And just, I think I would have been more engaged. And, it wouldn't have had to be that specific character. It could have been that somehow the Swedish writer character, that she somehow ended up on the show and we see it through her eyes, because I didn't particularly like the Spanish man. I just think dropping us into it more directly would have been more engaging for me personally. Or, alternatively, just giving us a lot more of the sort of thematic brain dumping of ideas and just waxing poetic a little bit more about these ideas instead of brushing over them. So anyway, that is what I personally would have done and would have liked, and I'm sort of rewriting that in my headcanon as a fun little horror jaunt of experiencing a show like Carnality, because I think that is a very unique, interesting, exciting, engaging idea. I just don't know that the way it was expressed in this book really drew me in, but certainly weird, definitely weird. But again, weird in a very different way from the other books I read for this video. It is 100% weird because of the plot just being some of the most random things you could think of strung together, and things just becoming more and more absurd. But again, not even, I saw some people describing it as dark comedy, and I just don't think it had enough comedy for me personally to really go there. It didn't go balls to the walls absurd, it didn't really drag it out and make it ridiculous, even though I know it sounds ridiculous because the plot literally is ridiculous, but just the way it's presented is so mundane almost. Everything is sort of shared as if it's no big deal. Anyway, that's it for spoilers, and I don't know, it just didn't quite click for me, which is a little sad. Like I said, it was fine. I'm giving it 3 stars. I think it was good. It was fine. Just could have been more for me personally. This one, sadly, was not as much of a hit as I hoped for it to be. So that's Carnality. We have 2 3-star reads and 2 5-star reads for this video, which is not too bad, honestly. So I'm not feeling defeated. Although now that I'm going to finish the Longcut, maybe I will be defeated, because I feel like the more breaks I take in reading it, the more I notice just how painful it is to read the sentences when I come back to it. I almost wish I'd just forced myself to read it all in one night, stayed up all night, and just forced my eyeballs to stay on the page until I finished, because I'm definitely struggling. Well, y'all, we did it. I finished the Longcut. I never thought this day would come. I am so glad to be finished, but also I really liked this book. This, honestly, as ironic as it might seem, might be my favorite read for this video. This book is so unique and so absurd and silly and ridiculous and a labor of love and also other kinds of labor. I feel like it also kind of hits on the core of a truth of being a creative person, of being an artist, of sort of the condition of being an artist, where you're constantly questioning if you are in fact an artist and if the things you make are in fact art, and how you can claim that as a title. Are you worthy of it? And also, what is your work? Does your work have meaning? Does it have a purpose? Is it worth doing? Is it worth spending time on? How do you define that? How do you categorize that for yourself? How do you live with the reality that you will never make every fleeting idea that enters your mind? You have to choose paths to go down, and sometimes you might regret a path not taken, but you also never know where you're going to end up. I just thought this was so clever and fun and interesting, and as much as it broke my brain a little bit to read, I really, really enjoyed it. And honestly, it was very relatable as someone who has always been very creative myself. I have always dabbled in many different forms of art and created art since before I can remember. And I've also constantly struggled with the idea of calling myself an artist or defining what I make as art. And I've also struggled with wanting to do a million different things and not knowing if I'm making the right choice and spending my time on the right artistic pursuit. And I also could really relate to the writing style. As much as it was painful to read at many points, honestly, I feel like this was a bit of a mirror for myself to understand why my husband gets frustrated sometimes when I'm telling him a story that I haven't really thought about first, and I'm just sort of torrenting, as the protagonist in this novel says, just letting it all out and not being able to stop and kind of going on these loops and weird random connections and jumping from thing to thing and then coming back again. And my husband is just sitting there feeling the same thing that I felt reading this book. I feel like I can understand him a little better now. And maybe I'll be a little more self-aware moving forward. But I don't know if that's a neurodivergent ADHD thing or if it's just some people are like that. I don't know. But some of the circuitous, repetitive, looping thoughts and run-on sentences in this were very relatable to me for my own thought process. But yeah, I just thought this was quite fun, very funny at points, very self-aware in a way that I found very entertaining. And I laughed out loud several times while reading. And I do think that the writing style, as much as it is a challenge, really adds to the book and what the book is trying to say about art and being an artist, the condition of. And I don't know, I really, really liked this. I kind of wish I'd had a little more time to read it. But on the other hand, I do think there is something to reading this more quickly and how it kind of adds to that frantic quality, especially at the end of the book when she's having a little bit of a mental breakdown, when she feels like she's finally solved the question of what her art is, and that kind of puts her in a tailspin. Reading it quickly, reading it sort of consistently, and kind of getting lost in it, I feel adds to the sort of unique quality of the writing style. Lots of things I related to, both in the sort of writing style thought process looping, but also in the subject matter. And I just thought this was great. So I'm really happy about this. I'm going to give it 5 stars. I feel like that's obvious already. And this might be my favorite for this video. I just think this is so fun and so unique and very relatable and also just silly and absurd. And I love that. So highly recommend the Longcut, especially for anyone out there who is also an artist or dabbles in creation and the arts and has struggled with some of those questions. I think you'll enjoy this. I love this quote near the end. She's talking to a friend as she's mentally, psychologically unraveling. "So in fact, I've learned nothing," I said. "Maybe not," she said, "but you've learned it thoroughly." So good. I love that so much. And yeah, so many funny bits at the end here as she's struggling to process what's happening. Oh yeah, she's talking about going to an exhibit where they have jewelry that looks like it would be painful to wear on display. I'm just going to start mid-sentence because these sentences are so long. "Looking less like jewelry than like tiny sculptures. Moreover, looking, it must be said, like the meeting of skin and jewelry would be something like intolerable. That they, the chokers and rings, would be horrible to wear. I immediately liked them. I immediately wanted to wear jewelry that would be horrible to wear. They, the chokers and rings, moreover, seemed to me not quite to be jewelry, if a piece of jewelry was so horrible to wear that it sat in a dish on a bureau day in and day out. If you did not wear it day in and day out, did it remain jewelry, or did it jump categories into or towards something resembling the category jewelry? Not quite, but what is it really?" I then needed to know what it was really. There's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek, self-aware, self-critical quality to it, while also indulging in all of those, overwhelming questions and all the ruminating. And I just find it absolutely delightful. And maybe some of that is just euphoria at finally finishing the book. But regardless, I'm very happy about it. I think it was great. I feel like I'll reread this at some point in the future, and I would love to read more from this author. This is very funny and very cutting, and commentary not only on the individual artists that are struggling with definitions and purpose, but also kind of the art world in general and art critics and some of the overwrought pretension that can come into play. Just fantastic. I'm not going to do any spoilers. There is very little plot here. Yeah, just fantastic. I loved this. 5 stars. Very happy this is very fun. So now that I finished on such a positive note, I'm going to rank the 5 books I read for this video from favorite to least favorite, and then also from weirdest to least weird, in my own very subjective opinion, to wrap this all up. I'm going to start by ranking them favorite to least favorite, because I feel like that's going to be easier for me. Ooh, is it going to be easy though? I don't know. I'm really questioning one of these placements. 2 of these are very tied for me. Okay, I think I'm going to do it like this. So this is my ranking for favorite to least favorite. So favorite on top, the Longcut, If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English, The Weak Spot, then Carnality, and Participation. So top 3 are all 5-star reads, and then the bottom 2 are 3-star reads. I was struggling with the placement between If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English and The Weak Spot because I really like both of them, but they're very different and I like them for very different reasons. But I think this is the correct placement. I think. I'm struggling. Honestly, I feel like this video was quite a success because even though I had 2 books that didn't 100% work for me, they were still 3-star reads for me, and I'm still glad I read them and I still got something out of reading them. I didn't have any total duds for this video, which is fantastic. And I guess now I'll try to rank them by weirdness, which I think is going to be harder, again, because they're all weird in their own unique way. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think, again, based on my own very subjective definition of what makes WeirdLit weird, this is my ranking. So the Longcut being the weirdest, then Participation, then If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English, then The Weak Spot, and then Carnality being the least weird. So, again, totally subjective and also very difficult to define, but I think that is how I would rank them. And it's interesting that the book that I found the weirdest is also my favorite, but that otherwise it's not necessarily correlated 100% with how weird it is, which I guess makes sense. But anyways, I'm gonna wrap up this video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this and indulging me in this sort of weird reading vlog idea. I would love to read more obscure experimental books and review them for you if that's something that y'all are interested in. So let me know in the comments. Let me know if you're going to pick up any of these books after watching this video, especially if you hadn't heard of them before or they weren't on your radar. I would love to know which ones piqued your interest. And of course, if you've read any of these, I 100% want to hear your thoughts. But I had a lot of fun making this video and I hope you enjoyed watching it too. I'm also very glad that I have now finished 5 more books for my TBR bookshelf. Pat myself on the back. That is it for this Weird Books reading vlog. Thank you so much for watching. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it and subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. Thank you to Parade for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to click the link in my description box and use code BRIDE40 for 40% off on their website. I love Parade and I'm so grateful they decided to sponsor this video. Thank you as always to my patrons for your support. If you want to read more books with me, I have a book club that meets every single month, and I also have a brand new buddy read where we're reading a book together quarterly, and we would love to have you. So feel free to join us. The link is in the description. And with that, I'm going to get going. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.